The dust on Adun Minor moved sideways. That was the first wrong thing Owen Hale noticed when he stepped off the ramp of the long harvest. Dust was supposed to fall. On this world, it slid along the ground in thin grey ribbons, pushed by air that was leaking out through cracks in the crust somewhere far below. It made a sound like paper being dragged. He had been hauling freight for 26 years, and he had never landed anywhere that whispered at him before. The landing field was empty, not quiet, empty. The loading cranes were still standing, arms up, holding nothing. A cargo sled sat halfway through a turn with its power cell pulled out. Somebody had taken the cell and left the sled. That told Owen more than a report would have. People who plan an evacuation take the sled. People who run take the cell. He checked his manifest one more time out of stubbornness. 40 tons of water filtration parts, sealed rations, and 2 crates of medical stock, contracted and paid for by the Sci-Fi Mining Authority at Adun Minor, delivery window still open for another 9 days. He had flown 11 weeks to get here. He had turned down 2 better jobs to keep the schedule. The whole colony had left 3 weeks ago. Owen stood there for a while and let himself be angry in a flat, tired way. Then he did what he always did, which was start walking, because standing around had never solved anything for him. The Sethari had built their town low and heavy, all thick stone and wide doorways, because they were big people with wings and they hated ceilings. Owen walked past a school with its doors open and its shelves stripped. He walked past a food hall where somebody had left a full pot on a cold burner. He was 2 streets from the brood hall when he heard something that was not the dust. It was a click, then another click, then a small hard sound like a stone dropped on a stone. The brood hall had come down on one side. Half the roof lay in the courtyard in slabs the size of doors. Inside, in the corner where the walls still held, 3 young Sethari looked back at him. They were children. He knew that immediately, the way anybody knows it. The biggest one was maybe as tall as Owen's chest, dark green, with wings that had not finished growing, and that he was holding stiffly out to the sides to make himself look larger. The second was smaller and grey, and had not moved at all, only turned her head, watching him with 2 flat yellow eyes and a stillness that Owen found more unsettling than the big one's posture. The third was tiny, curled behind the other 2, and was making a wet noise every time she breathed. Between them and Owen, on the floor, was a grown Sethari female who had been dead for some time. A roof slab lay across her back. Her arms were still stretched out toward the corner where the 3 of them were sitting. She had gotten them there, and then the roof had come down. The big one made the clicking sound again. It was a threat. His throat was doing it. He was terrified and doing it anyway. Owen put his hands out where they could be seen and sat down on a broken step, which put his head lower than theirs. He had learned that trick from a dockhand on a station with a bad reputation. Sit down, and nobody thinks you are about to do something. I'm not here for trouble, he said. My name is Owen. I brought food. The grey one spoke. Her trade was clear and careful, like she had been taught it properly and had been waiting a long time to use it. You are a human. Yes. Humans eat carrion. Some of us eat almost anything, Owen said. We don't eat people. Whoever told you that was lying to you, and I'm sorry they did. The big one clicked again, but the sound was thinner now. Owen looked at the dead female. Was she yours? She was our broodmother, the grey one said. The clans took the registered dependents. We were not registered. Our sponsor died before the filing. Under debt weight, an unclaimed orphan carries the unpaid weight of the broodmother. Anyone who claims us takes the weight. She said it the way a child says a rule she has been made to repeat. So they left you, Owen said. It was lawful, she said. That's not the same thing, Owen rubbed his face. How long has it been? 22 days. He went back to the ship and brought food. That took 3 trips because he did not want to carry too much at once and look like he was crowding them. They ate the way starving children eat, which is badly and too fast, and the small one could not keep hers down and cried about it, a thin wheezing sound that made the big one put a wing over her. Their names came out slowly over that first night. The big one was Bram, The grey one was Wren, the small sick one was Cellar. Owen slept 4 hours on the courtyard stones and woke up with his back ruined, and a problem he had been avoiding since the moment he saw them. The Long Harvest was a short-haul hauler with a crew rating of 2, life support for 2, water for 2, fuel margin calculated for a ship carrying paid cargo, not passengers. He did the numbers 3 times on his slate that morning while the air outside kept crawling away from the planet. 2 Sethari children, even young ones, were heavy. 3 was past every line the ship had. He was still staring at the slate when Bram came and stood over him. The boy had worked it out on his own. Sethari children were not stupid, and this one had been counting food since the day the roof fell. "Your ship carries 2, Bram said. His trade was rougher than his sister's. "Take them, I am the largest, I will stay." He said it steadily, he had practiced it. Behind him, Wren had gone very still again, and Cellar had started to make a sound that had nothing to do with her lungs. Owen looked at this child who had decided to die politely, and something in him went hard and quiet. He stood up and walked past Bram without answering into the cargo bay and began cutting the restraint braces off crate 1 with a torch. 40 tons of contracted freight. His bond. His license, probably, once the claim came in. He cut the braces and shoved the crates down the ramp one after another, and they burst open on the field and spilled filtration parts into the sliding dust. Bram had followed him. All 3 of them had. "What are you doing?" Wren said. "Making room." Owen did not look up. The torch hissed. "Mass budget, cargo goes, you 3 fit. You will owe the authority for that cargo." "Yes, that is a very large weight." "Yes, why?" Owen shut off the torch. His hands were shaking from the work or the anger or the 26 years, he could not have said. He looked at the 3 of them standing in the open ramp light, one too big, one too still, one too small. "Because there's 3 of you and 1 of me," he said, "and somebody has to stay, so here it is, and I'm only going to say it once. I'll get all 3 of you out. I'm not leaving anybody behind. And I am never going to lie to you about anything, not once, not to make you feel better, not ever. That's it, that's the whole thing." Nobody spoke. Then Wren took out the little slate she had been carrying since the roof fell, the one Owen had assumed was a toy, and began to write down what he had said, word for word. He did not think anything of it at the time. The Long Harvest lifted 11 hours later, stripped of cargo, tools, spare plating, and every personal thing Owen owned except the clothes he was wearing. It burned harder than it was ever meant to. The hull sang. Alarms he had never heard in his life came on and stayed on. But it went up, and it kept going up, and when it broke atmosphere, the dust of Adun Minor went on sliding sideways below them, alone, with nobody left to hear it. A clerk on Tannock Station spent 4 minutes trying to find a box on a form that would fit 3 children who legally did not exist. Her name was Vera Doss, and she had been processing arrivals for 9 years, and she had seen most things. She had not seen this. The human in front of her desk had no cargo, no license bond, no ship insurance, and 3 young Sethari standing behind him, one of whom was breathing like a broken pump. "Species classification, I can do," she said. "Guardianship, I can do. But I need a jurisdiction to file the guardianship against, and Sethari Central just answered my query with a refusal of claim." "What does that mean?" Owen asked. "It means they say these children were never born." Vera turned her screen around so he could see it. "There is no record. There is no clan. Legally, sir, you are standing next to nothing." The fight over that piece of paper lasted 2 years. The Human Border Authority did not want the children, because keeping them meant admitting a Sethari colony had been abandoned, and admitting that meant a diplomatic file nobody wanted to open. They wanted the 3 returned. The Sethari did not want them returned, because returning them meant the refusal of claim had been improper, and that meant reviewing 11 centuries of similar filings. Both governments arrived, separately, at the same convenient position, which was that Owen Hale should quietly go away and take the problem with him. So Owen quietly went away and took the problem with him. And that is how 3 Sethari children came to be raised in a 2-room dock unit on the cheap ring of a station nobody visited on purpose. He lost the license first. The mining authority filed for the dumped cargo, as he knew they would, and the review board suspended his long-haul rating and attached his earnings. After that, he flew short runs, station to station, moving things that were legal but only just, for people who did not ask questions and did not pay well. Sella almost died in the second winter, if a station can have a winter. Her lungs had never recovered from the 22 days in the dust. She needed a medical filtration unit, and the unit cost more than Owen made in 11 months. He bought it on credit at an interest rate that a smarter man would have refused, and then he worked 11 months to pay it off, and during those 11 months he ate 1 meal a day and told the children he had eaten at the port. That was the only time he came close to breaking the second half of the promise. Wren caught him at it in the 4th month. She did not say anything. She simply began leaving half of her own food on his side of the table every night until he stopped lying and started eating. "You said never," she reminded him. "I did," he agreed, and after that he did not do it again. The honesty turned out to be harder work than the rescue. Owen had thought the hard part was over when the long harvest broke atmosphere. It was not. The hard part was 1,000 small evenings. He told Bram when Bram was 12 and had put a dockhand in the medical bay for calling Sella a lizard, that the man had deserved it and that Bram was still going to apologize, because a boy who was already twice everyone's size did not get to be the one who threw first, and that this was unfair, and that it was going to keep being unfair for the rest of his life. He told Sella when she asked at 9 that her lungs were probably never going to be right, that she would always tire faster than her brother, and that this was not a punishment for anything and not her fault. She cried. He let her cry and did not tell her it would be fine. He told Wren when she was 14 and asked in a very level voice whether he would send them back when they became too expensive, that he did not know how he was going to pay for the next month, that he was frightened about it most nights, and that sending them back was not on the list of things he was considering and had never been on the list and would not be on the list. Wren wrote that down too. By then she was writing everything down. She had filled 4 slates. Owen thought it was a hobby, the way some children collected station tokens. The strangest fights they had were about debt. The Sethari mind, even a young one, ran on debt weight the way a human mind runs on time. Every kindness had a number. Every number had to be settled. Not settling was not generosity, it was a kind of violence, because an unsettled weight hung over the person who owed it forever. So the 3 children kept trying to calculate what they owed him, and Owen kept refusing to let them. "The cargo," Wren said once, when she was 16, spreading her figures on the table. 40 tons at authority rate, the license suspension, 6 years of lost earning at your prior grade, the medical unit with interest, housing, food, schooling. I have been keeping the total. Put it away. It is not a small number, Owen. I know it's not. Then how are we to settle it? You're not. That is not possible. It's possible, Owen said, because I'm not asking. That's how it works where I'm from. You don't get a bill, you just get it. Wren stared at him. Bram, in the corner, had stopped what he was doing. Sella had gone very quiet. Then what do we do with the weight? Wren said, and for the first time in years her voice was not level. It has to go somewhere. It has to. If we cannot pay you, we carry it forever, and you will not even tell us how much it is. You carry it forward, Owen said. He had not planned the answer. It arrived the way most of his answers arrived, which was late and plain. You don't pay me, you pay the next one. Someday there's going to be somebody standing in front of you who needs something and can't pay for it, and you'll be in a position to help, and you'll help. That's the settlement, that's the whole thing. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Wren picked up her slate and wrote it down, and that sentence would eventually be argued in front of 40,000 people, though none of the 4 of them could have known it. A human naval officer came through Tannock in the 8th year. Her name was Ilva Roshan, and she was investigating the Adun Minor abandonment for a committee that would later cancel her funding. She sat in Owen's two-room unit, drank his bad tea, and offered him a settlement. Hand the case over, sign a statement, take the money, let the children become someone else's file. You would be free of it, she said. You would be flying long haul again in a year. Owen looked across the room at Bram, who was 17 and enormous, and reading a military history badly. At Sella, who was 15 and had taken the wall panel off the air handler again and was improving it without permission. At Ren, who was 16 and had stopped pretending not to listen. No, he said. Roshan went away and wrote an honest report that nobody read. It was Bram who asked the last question of that time, on a night when Owen was 49 and had noticed his hands hurting in the cold. Humans die fast, Bram said. He was not being cruel. Sethari lived 400 years, and he had only just understood what that meant about the man who raised him. You will be gone, and we will still be young. What happens then? Owen thought about lying. He had gotten better at wanting to and never doing it. Then you three keep going, he said. That's what the promise was for. It wasn't so you'd have me. It was so you'd have something after me. 406 auxiliary personnel were written off in a single line of a supply report, and that line was the beginning of everything that came after. The unit had been cut off on a moon called Hesh during a border action that the Sethari fleet would later call a police matter, and everyone who fought in it would call a war. They were auxiliaries, which meant low clan, which meant low debt weight, which meant that when Fleet Command ran the recovery calculation, the answer came back negative. The fuel, the risk, and the ships required to pull them out cost more than 406 low-weight lives were assessed at. The line in the report read, "Recovery not economical, position released." Subcommander Bram read it, put down the slate, and took 3 ships without authorization. He was gone for 9 days. He came back with 391 survivors, 2 of his ships venting atmosphere, and a formal charge waiting for him at the dock. The court stripped his rank. It was the correct decision under fleet regulation, and everybody involved knew it, including Bram, who did not defend himself beyond one statement, which was entered into the record and which nobody expected. There were 400 of them, and one of me, he said. Somebody had to stay. He was busted down to line officer and given a supply posting on a station at the edge of nothing. Within 2 years, transfer requests to that station had become a problem for fleet personnel administration. Auxiliaries were requesting it, then low clan regulars, then, embarrassingly, officers. Nobody could say exactly why except that word had gotten around, the way it does, that there was a commander somewhere who would come for you. They gave him a squadron back because it was easier than explaining the transfer numbers. Ren, meanwhile, was making enemies in a much quieter room. The Sethari archive was 11 levels of stone under the old capital, and it was the least ambitious posting in the civil service. Clerks went there to be forgotten. Ren went there on purpose, and she spent her first 11 years reading, and what she found was this. The refusal of claim provision had been created 900 years before as a technical fix for inheritance disputes. It had been used, since then, 470,000 times. She read every one of them. It took her 11 years because she would not accept a summary. The pattern was not subtle once you had the whole shape of it. Refusal of claim was how the Sethari made inconvenient populations stop existing. Failed colonies, plague districts, low-weight brood halls in a bad season. You did not need to kill anyone. You simply filed that they had never been claimed, and after that there was no legal person to rescue, and the ships did not go, and nobody had committed any crime at all. She began publishing. Her arguments were dry and short and impossible to answer, and they all rested on one idea that she had learned in a 2-room dock unit from a man cutting braces off a cargo crate. A statement once witnessed is permanent. Not because a court says so, because it was said and it was heard, and the hearing cannot be undone. You may break a promise, you may not make it never have been made. The Sethari had built 4,000 years of law on debts, which are numbers, and numbers can be adjusted. They had no category at all for a thing that was simply true because someone had said it out loud in front of witnesses. She called it the witnessed word. Older jurists called it sentimental, and then, later, when it began winning cases, called it dangerous. Sella, third of the three, built ships. She was not a theorist. She was a shipwright with bad lungs who had spent her whole childhood listening to a filtration unit run in the corner of a room, and she had one professional habit that her masters could not train out of her, which was that she oversized life support. The Sethari standard sized emergency air and water to 70% of rated crew, because a full 70% survival in a hull breach was considered an excellent outcome, and the remaining 30% of mass could be sold as cargo capacity. It was efficient. It had been the standard for 600 years. Sella built to 110% every time on every hull and lost 3 contracts over it in her first decade. Then a freighter called the Vero took a rock through her forward third in a lane that was supposed to be clear, with a crew of 92 aboard, and 11 hours later a rescue tug found 92 Sethari alive in a wrecked ship that had no business keeping any of them breathing. The Vero was a Sella hull. The Standards Board fought it for 9 more years, then they adopted it. In the yards, the extra margin was already being called something else, a slang term the guild masters disliked and could not stamp out, which was the hail margin. Not one of the 3 ever explained the name to anyone who asked. Matriarch Odrin was 290 years old when she finally went to see Ren in the archive. She was no longer speaking for a delegation. She had signed the original refusal of claim for Adun Minor herself as a young administrator, on a day she had not thought about in a century and now thought about most days. "You are taking us apart," she said. "I am correcting a filing error," Ren said. 470,000 of them. "You have imported a human weakness and made a weapon of it. Sentiment, feeling. We had that once, child. We killed each other with it for 2,000 years, clan against clan, favor against favor, until we learned to count instead. Debt weight ended the wars. It ended the famines. Sethari children stopped starving because we finally had a way to know exactly what was owed and to whom." Her pale wings shifted. "Do not tell me we were monsters. We were the first people in this arm of the galaxy to stop being monsters." "I know," Ren said, and meant it. "It is the strongest argument against me, and I have never pretended otherwise. Debt weight fed my species for 4,000 years. Then why?" "Because it could not carry 3 children off a dying rock," Ren said, "and a short-lived alien with no obligation and no witnesses could. Matriarch, your system is not wrong. It is only incomplete. It has a place for what is owed. It has no place at all for what is given." Odrin was quiet a long time. "This human," she said, "hail, he is still living. He is 68, he flies freight. His ship is held together with repairs my sister made when she was 14. Ren's voice did not change, which those who knew her understood was the tell. "He does not know about any of this. He has never once written to ask what we have done with what he gave us. It does not occur to him that there is an account." The word promise entered formal Sethari legal language, that year, imported from trade, kept as a distinct category from debt, over the objection of every senior jurist on the panel. Young Sethari began making them to each other, badly and constantly, the way the young do with any new thing. Their elders found it obscene. And in a chamber on the homeworld, 17 months later, the Grand Tribunal formally opened the Adun Minor inquiry, and the presiding officer asked the archivist Ren to name the origin of the doctrine on which her entire case rested. She named a human freight pilot and gave his registry number, and the chamber laughed because they assumed it was a legal metaphor. The summons arrived at a fuel depot in the form of a document so heavy with clan seals that the depot clerk assumed it was a warrant and quietly stepped away from the counter. Owen Hale was 71 years old. He read it twice, standing at the counter with his hands aching in the cold of the loading bay, and then he asked the clerk whether the Sethari had a death penalty. "I think so," the clerk said. For some things. That's what I figured, Owen said. He went, he did not tell anyone, because there was no one left to tell. He borrowed a jacket from a dockhand because his own had a burn hole in the elbow, and he had decided that if he was going to be sentenced, he would at least be tidy about it. He spent the 11-day passage rehearsing an explanation for the 40 tons of dumped cargo, which he had never stopped feeling bad about. The Grand Tribunal chamber on the Sethari homeworld held 11,000 and was full. Another 40,000 watched from the terraces outside. It was the largest legal proceeding in 6 centuries. Nobody had told Owen any of this. He arrived at a side entrance, alone, in a jacket that did not fit, and a young usher had to ask him 3 times to repeat his name before she went pale and ran to get somebody senior. The case was not technically about him. The case was the Adun Minor inquiry, and by then it had swallowed the whole refusal of claim doctrine, and behind that stood 470,000 filings, and the question of whether the Sethari had spent 9 centuries committing an orderly, well-documented, entirely lawful atrocity. The prosecution's case, argued by the archivist Wren, came down to one thing. The clan said the abandonment of Adun Minor was necessity, the atmosphere was failing, the ships were few, choices had to be made, and the law made them cleanly, without cruelty, according to weight. And Wren said it was not necessity because a human did it. A human with no obligation to those children, no clan relation, no sponsorship, no legal duty of any kind. A short-lived alien in a failing hauler rated for 2, with a paid contract in his hold and a license he needed to eat, who arrived alone, with nobody watching, with no possibility of reward, and who got all 3 of them off that rock anyway, and then spent his entire remaining working life paying for it. If it could be done, Wren said to the chamber, then it was not impossible, and if it was not impossible, then it was not necessity, it was preference. And a preference for the deaths of children is not a legal doctrine. It is a decision, and decisions have authors, and the authors are in this room. The defense was led by matriarch Audrin, who was 301 years old, and who had signed the Adun Minor filing herself, and who did not hide behind anyone. She was very good. That was the part the terraces had not expected. She did not deny the filings. She entered them all into evidence herself on the first day, which took 9 hours to read aloud. Then she stood in front of a civilization that was preparing to be ashamed of itself and told it not to be stupid about it. Before deadweight, she said, we ate each other. That is not a figure of speech. There are middens on this planet, clan against clan for 2,000 years, and every one of those wars began with a favor that could not be measured and an insult that could not be settled. We invented the ledger because we could not survive our own generosity, and it worked. Famine ended. Slavery ended. The clan wars ended. Sethari children stopped starving in the tens of millions. She turned toward Wren. You wish to put a hole in that ledger. You wish to write in a category that has no number, that cannot be settled, that can be claimed by anyone against anyone. I tell you what will pour through that hole, archivist. Everything we spent 4,000 years draining out. She let that sit. And I will say the other thing, which no one else here will say. This human could afford it. He had 90 years, 90. He could spend 20 on a grand gesture and never once have to live with the arithmetic, because the arithmetic outlived him. We do not get that. We live 400 years. We watch what our kindnesses become. Humans are generous the way children are brave, and for the same reason. It was, everyone agreed afterward, the finest argument of her life. Owen was called on the 6th day. He was a terrible witness. He could not follow the procedure. He stood when he was supposed to sit. He apologized twice for the cargo before anyone asked him about it. When the prosecutor's aide tried to walk him through the moral framework of his own actions, he became visibly confused because he did not have one and had never suspected he was supposed to. Pilot Hale, the presiding officer, said at last, with what may have been kindness, let us begin very simply. Why did you take the children? Owen looked around the chamber. 11,000 faces. He had never spoken to more than 9 people at once in his life. There were 3 of them, he said, and one of me, and somebody had to stay. There was a sound in the chamber then, up in the high terraces, that the recorders logged as unidentified. It was the auxiliaries. 400 of them had come from Hesh, on their own money, and they had heard that sentence before, in a court-martial, from a man who had come 9 days through fire to get them. "What did you expect in return?" the officer asked. "Nothing." "Pilot Hale, please answer the question." "I did answer it." "You expected some form of settlement?" "No." "Some future consideration, some standing, some—" "No," Owen said, and he was starting to get irritated now, which turned out to be the most useful thing that happened all week. "Look, they were children in a hole with a dead woman and the air was going. There wasn't a plan. There wasn't a trade. I had a ship and they didn't. That's all it was. It was never bigger than that." The chamber could not process it. 11,000 people who had been raised from the egg on the principle that nothing moves without a ledger entry sat, and listened to a dying alien explain that there had been no entry and simply could not make the sentence mean anything. So Wren entered the record. 22 years of it, 4 cracked slates and 11 newer ones, every day of a childhood written down by a girl who had started recording because she had learned young that adults lie and evidence does not. It was read into the tribunal over 4 days. Not one instance of Owen Hale invoking obligation. Not one instance of him namming a debt. Not one instance, in 22 years and 11,000 recorded exchanges, of him being caught in a lie, including the 11 months he ate 1 meal a day and told them he had eaten at the port, which he confessed on his own the same week he was caught. On the last day, Odrin rose to cross-examine, and everyone leaned forward, because she had not lost an exchange yet. "Pilot Hale, you lost your license." "Yes." "Your savings, your career, 6 years of earnings attached." "Yes." "You surrendered the 3 of them at Tanakh and did not see them again for 20 years. 20 years out of the very few you are given." "Yes." Knowing all of that, Odrin said, every part of it, the cargo, the license, the hunger, the 20 years, knowing the whole price as you know it now, would you do it again? "Yes," Owen said. He did not pause. There was no space between the question and the answer at all, no breath, nothing, and that was the thing that broke it, because everyone in that chamber had been waiting for the half-second in which a mind performs a calculation. There was no calculation. There had never been one. There was nothing in there to calculate with. Odrin stood for a moment longer. Then she sat down and did not finish her argument and never spoke in the chamber again. The doctrine of refusal of claim was struck down 11 days later. The Adun Minor dead were named, all 1,206 of them, on a wall that still stands. But the verdict was the smaller half of it. The larger half had happened in a single unhesitating syllable in front of 40,000 witnesses. Afterward, in a stone room off the chamber, the 4 of them were alone together for the first time in 20 years. Bram, who was a warlord now and had a scar across his jaw, gripped Owen's forearm and could not say anything at all, which was the same thing he had not said at Tanakh. Sela took a small battered object out of her wrap and set it on the table. It was the control board of a medical filtration unit, 14 years of dust cleaned off it, kept. Wren said, "You told us once that you had made an error. I recorded it." "I remember." "I am correcting the record." She set the cracked slate down between them. "You were witnessed, Owen. Witness things do not end." Owen looked at the 3 of them and at the slate and at his own ruined hands. "I made one promise," he said. "One, it was not supposed to be this much trouble. The house was too small, and everyone involved understood that this was the point." Sela had built it herself on the yard world where she worked. 2 rooms, low ceilings, a bad table with one leg shimmed by a folded slate. She had built it from memory. When Bram saw it for the first time, he stood in the doorway for a while and then went outside and did not come back in for an hour. Owen lived there for 9 years. He did not become important. That should be said plainly, because a great many things were built in his name later, and he had nothing to do with any of them. He was an old man with bad hands who lived on a shipyard world and complained about the food. He complained about the food constantly. Sethari cooking was, in his words, an insult performed with heat. Bram, who had by then reorganized the entire fleet supply system, spent an unreasonable amount of his personal time arranging for human staples to be shipped in, and the two of them argued about seasoning for 9 years, and this was, both of them understood, the argument standing in for something else. Wren came less often and stayed longer. She would sit at the bad table and read her cases aloud to him, and he would fall asleep in the middle of them, and she would keep reading anyway. Sella never left. She moved her whole design office into the shed behind the house. Her masters found this professionally embarrassing and were told by a warlord to leave it alone. He flew until he was 78, short hops around the yard world in a small courier cellar built for him, with controls modified for hands that no longer closed properly. Then one morning he could not manage the release catch, and he sat in the cockpit for a while, and then he came inside and did not go back out to the field again. Nobody said anything about it. That was a mercy the three of them had learned from him. You do not narrate a person's losses back to them. He died at 80, at the bad table, in the middle of a sentence. Wren had been reading him a filing about water rights, and he had interrupted to tell her she had the station names backwards, that it was the outer ring that held the depot. He had flown it 100 times, and it was the inner ring that had the. That was all of it. The three of them agreed, later that same day, that the sentence would be entered into the record unfinished, not completed, not corrected. It sits in the Sethari archive that way still, and clerks who do not know the story ask about it, and clerks who do know the story tell them. Sethari funeral law had no category for a non-clan alien. They made one, it took the jurists 11 days, and the result was clumsy, and everybody knew it. The rites ran another 11 days. 90,000 Sethari attended, and most of them had never met him, and among them were 311 surviving auxiliaries from Hesh who had traveled 4 months to stand in the back. The crews of every cellar hull in service held silence for 1 hour. There were 9,000 of them by then. The centuries after went like this. Bram became warlord of the fleet at 204. His first act in that office was the Standing Order, which is 6 lines long and which has never been amended. No Sethari force abandons a position containing living personnel at any cost ratio, under any calculation, without exception. Officers complained that it was militarily unsound. It is militarily unsound. It is also still in force 11 centuries later. And no fleet in this arm of the galaxy has ever been able to make Sethari auxiliaries break and run, and every strategist who has studied the question has arrived at the same conclusion, which is that you cannot rout troops who are certain that someone is coming. Wren served in the archive for 406 years and never accepted a title grander than archivist. She rewrote Sethari civil law from underneath, one filing at a time. The doctrine of the witnessed word is now the foundation of the entire code. A thing said before witnesses is permanent, may be broken but not unmade, and creates a category of obligation that is not a debt and cannot be settled, only carried forward. Sethari law students learn it in their first month. Very few of them learn where it came from, because Wren refused, throughout her life, to allow the case to be taught with her name on it. Sella built ships for 340 years. Her hulls carried the Sethari through 2 wars and 1 exodus. She never once built to the efficient standard. In the yards, the surplus is still called the Hail Margin, and the guild masters gave up fighting the name 800 years ago. She died first of the 3, which none of them had expected. Her lungs, in the end, 22 days of bad air when she was very small. Humanity, for its part, spent about 2 centuries being confused. Human diplomats found that Sethari negotiators treated verbal human commitments as absolutely binding, more binding than signed instruments, and would not accept the usual polite, hedging language in any treaty. Whole careers were built on theories about it. The Trade Ministry ran studies. Someone wrote a well-regarded book proposing that it stemmed from a Sethari religious tradition. The actual answer was in a tribunal transcript that no one in the human government ever read, in which a freight pilot from a station nobody had heard of was asked why he had done it, and said there were 3 of them and 1 of me. 300 years after his death, on a training moon, a Sethari cadet raised a hand during the oath of service and asked why the oath used a human word. The instructor was a jurist of Wren's line, doing a rotation she had volunteered for, and she had answered the question 40 times and never gotten tired of it. It was a colony called Adun Minor, she said. The air failed. The clans evacuated the registered dependents and left 3 unregistered hatchlings behind lawfully. A human freight pilot arrived 11 weeks late with a cargo contract. His ship carried 2. He dumped 40 tons of freight and his own belongings on the field, took all 3 and lost his license for it. He raised them in 2 rooms on a station. He never told them a lie, and he never told them what they owed him. Those 3 children were Bram, Wren, and Sella. That is why the oath is a promise and not a debt. The cadet thought about it. That does not sound like very much, she said. No, the instructor agreed. It was not very much. That is the entire point of it. 1 man, 3 children, 1 sentence, and nobody watching. And it was not very much. It was a hot afternoon on a world whose dust moved sideways, and a torch hissing against a cargo brace, and 40 tons of somebody else's property going down a ramp into the wind. It was a man in his 40s with a ruined career and no plan at all, who did not know he was doing anything, turning around to face 3 children who had every reason not to believe him. I'll get all 3 of you out. I'm not leaving anybody behind, and I am never going to lie to you about anything, not once, not to make you feel better, not ever. He said it once. They spent 900 years keeping it.